arming our schools. How do you know if that's the right answer for you? Is it even a consideration that we should be talking about?
When you start talking about arming schools, now you're talking about training, now you're talking about liability, you're talking about a lot of stuff that goes into that, when the simpler process is what we have in arming our first responders, so that they can respond. So when they get there, they can take an active approach and try to diffuse the situation as much as they can. When you start talking about arming schools, then you got to really start going into the backgrounds of the people that you're arming.
Absolutely.
And then you got to worry about, in some schools, if the students discover, where your weapons are, and they decide to revolt or come together and get a bunch of weapons. Now we've created a situation that's going to go way beyond, the things that we're imagining, and it's going to go directly in the face of some of the things that we're trying to prevent in the first place. We've talked about mental health. We've talked about unstable environments and different things that kids are experiencing. So now we're going to take some of those kids, just like he was talking about earlier. You get a kid on Instagram that puts up some pictures of with his dad's guns, and he's trying to flex and do all that kind of stuff, and they evaluate him, and there's nothing wrong with him, and then he goes to school and he gets a couple of his buddies, and they clear the evaluations, and they get all of the guns. Now we've got a whole other situation. So that topic right there, I'll be telling you, I'm strictly against anything remotely close to that, and I would, guess that my fellow law enforcement in here would probably say the same things. Because it just creates a...
Well, I know it's a very hot topic. It's a divisive topic, but I bring it up only because we think about sometimes the rural communities where your police chief, your emergency person is also the fire chief and part-time principal. How do you handle those kind of instances? Paul, did you
I'd like to chime in here. Again, the Center for Education Safety is a part of the Missouri School Boards Association, where we serve large school districts in major metropolitan areas, small rural school districts where it may be 15, 20 minutes before a law enforcement response could get there. And we don't take a position on do you arm staff or don't you arm staff. However, we have two things that we're very adamant about. First of all, it has to be a community decision. What's appropriate for you? What's probably not appropriate, maybe in downtown St. Louis or some other major metropolitan area, may be very appropriate in a rural county where you only have one officer maybe on duty in the daytime shift for the rural area, and it may be 20 minutes before he gets there. They may have staff that would be very appropriate to train that has maybe a military background or something like that. That in the rare instance that you might have to need that to stop a violent act, that might be appropriate. But the other thing is, then again, we're telling you it has to be a community decision. It has to be discussed at the community level. All the stakeholder communities need to weigh in on it. Law enforcement, the legal aspects of it, the staff, the school, parents even need to be involved in that conversation. And then if you go that route, again, that you absolutely have to train. You have to have training jointly with the law enforcement, so you know how they're going to respond. They know how you're going to identify yourself, things like that. And then also some other safety nets in place. In law enforcement, if an officer is involved in a shooting, even if it's a good shooting, there's going to be emotional stress and trauma and stuff. And law enforcement has dealt with this for years and years and years, and they have safety mechanisms in place to help those officers get through that. Schools have nothing, so you need to be thinking about those liability aspects of it also, if you go that route. So it's a decision that you shouldn't go into haphazardly. You need to give it serious thought.
Right. Well, it sounds like what you're telling us also is that there is no cookie cutter approach to what you do from one district to another along the way. Those are good comments.
I don't think ever in the city of St. Louis, in the St. Louis public schools, you'll see teachers and administrators. However, we do have a unique situation where we have supervisors and mobile inspectors that are armed and they have cars. We have about 18, and our district is broken down into three areas. So they respond, but they train with St. Louis City and County for getting their licensing and firearms training. So like Lieutenant Perry Johnson was saying, training is essential. There's liability. So they annually qualify twice a year, and they do what they need to do there. So that's one unique perspective. And that's mainly only in the middle and high schools, but those same officers do go by all of the elementary schools as well to ensure that things are safe there as well.
Okay, good.
After the Sandy Hook incident, we had a meeting with all of the school districts that wish to participate in St. Louis County. And Tim Fitch was the chief at the time, and we really thought that the school districts at that point were going to embrace arming some of their staff. And what we found is as a police department, what we found is the opposite is true. You know, basically what Mr. Fennerwald was saying is that it's a district-by-district decision. Overwhelmingly, the majority of the districts are not in favor of it, and that's their call because it is a community decision. And even within that, there was some variance on how much the school districts wanted to do and different approaches they wanted to take. But several of the superintendents that were involved in this discussion voiced a common theme, is that the purpose, any individual in life can do one job really, really well. And the purpose of our school officials and our school administrators and our school teachers is to instruct and train and teach our children. And it's the purpose of law enforcement to protect them. So what we looked at in St. Louis County is that we know a couple things about school safety. The threat's always going to be there. It's always going to take a set period of time for law enforcement to respond. So the best thing that we could do in cooperation with the schools, because arming the schools is I don't think ever going to occur, is increase the amount of time that the school is able to afford safe protection to their children or to their residents, so to speak, and decrease the amount of time that law enforcement takes to get there. So, that's what that's basically, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's basically what came out of that discussion, is that, the school districts and law enforcement be on the same page on what is happening within the schools to increase the amount of time it takes law enforcement to get there, and law enforcement and schools being on the same page allows a quicker response time and a more informed decision when we take action.
Just a quick comment. When the Department of Ed, David Esquith, was at our task force, he seemed opposed to arming teachers, and there were several incidences where the weapons, when a teacher was armed, that they accidentally discharged. So those were the concerns that he had when he made a presentation to our task force.
Well, it also falls back on when we talked about earlier the perception, and especially the perception for the youth. When we're introducing guns into a school, this raises the whole feeling of this isn't a safe learning environment. Now my teachers are carrying guns. And I just think that's something to caution anyone thinking about that what are we bringing into the school when we talked about a safe, comfortable learning environment?
Good point.
That topic actually came up in our district here a couple of years ago. And when we look at some of our educators, are some of them capable of handling a gun? Obviously, some of them are. However, as educators, and you educators in the room understand, coming up through the ranks of education, you understand your job is to maintain your school, make sure that they get your curriculum done, and your focus is really not on a firearm on your side. We in law enforcement train every year, and it's been drilled in us from year to year, weapon retention. We don't not only know how to shoot our weapon, but we also know how to retain it and keep it. Focus and training. If a teacher's teaching, they're not going to focus on where their weapon's at. So that becomes an availability to someone who really wants. Because if somebody's mindset knows the teacher's up there teaching, and when we get that gun, they're going to go get it. Where on law enforcement side, we're trained to keep our weapons in retention. The other thing is, we do active shooter drills twice a year. We do one over Christmas break, we do one big one in the summer, and we invite our teachers. The problem is you guys know from the shootings in the past, if a shooting happens in a school, you'll end up with a couple hundred officers there from all over. We'll have officers from St. Louis County show up. Do they know my staff? If they go in the hallway and they see somebody with a gun, do they know they're our staff? What are we going to do? So our perspective is the guy with the gun in the building is the guy we need to take out. We don't need those extra deterrents. And if you have staff members armed, is their focus on keeping those kids safe? Or do they feel obligated to go after the bad guy?
Right.
Let the professionals deal with taking the bad guy out and keep those kids safe. That's what we came down to. Because of the training, You can shoot good, but just because you shoot good, does that make you
Right.
able to retain your weapon when you're focused on everything else? We've been training our careers. I'm always knowing where my sidearm is and how to retain it. But educators know how good a shot they are. They're not training that. Now, school's going to spend that much money to send administrators
Right.
to shooting
Sure.
training.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Deputy Heinley to comment on that, and then I'd like to go to Sarah, in case you might have a comment you'd like to add to that as well. Deputy?
My feeling's the same as all the other law enforcement here. I don't believe arming teachers or principals is the right idea. The biggest deterrent towards school shootings is an SRO inside the building, as a police officer, because most of the school shootings that have happened across the country have been unarmed, have been schools that did not have SROs at them. So I feel if you're going to spend the money to train your teachers, train your administrators, and do whatever, the better use of that money would be to get an SRO inside your building. Or if not even a full-time SRO, if you could hire police officers for extra duties to sit inside a building, I think that's a great idea too. But I think we're pretty much in consensus as law enforcement that we don't want those extra guns inside that school.
Okay, that's great. I'd like to ask Sarah to comment on that, and then maybe go to Jamie and then Melissa as well. Sarah?
And I'll piggyback with Ben. I think absolutely, like, we want our administrators, and I think I can safely speak for the teachers as well, exactly what the gentleman said across the table, is we want them focused on educating. We want them focused on what's happening. And I would much rather see time, resources, allocations not spent on training or or arming our schools, but rather getting the appropriate personnel to those schools. So in our rural situations, yes, we have very rural situations in Illinois where we may not have a law enforcement officer there for 25, 30 minutes. Sure. We all know, how long Sandy Hook took. We all know what that looks like. But I would much rather spend their time and resources on how to protect them, protect themselves through safety and getting people there, finding money to help get someone in closer proximity than actually providing, weapons to our administrators. Right. And from the legal standpoint, as representing administrators, that's just not, and that's not, yes, they may be very avid hunters, or they may take up on it as a side, as a hobby. It's much different in a crisis situation than it is in those other situations. And I wouldn't be supportive of that from not only from how, from the law enforcement perspective, but from just the plain liability and personal responsibility that contains.
Right. Yeah, and it's a topic, that we hear every once in a while that comes up and may not be popular, but we'd be remiss if we didn't bring it to the table here for everybody to discuss.
Yeah, we get all of our positions from our members. Very democratic organization, resolutions, a delegate assembly process. So on policy decisions and legislative decisions, our position is based on that. And we did have 3 years ago a proposal from a district to do precisely this. It failed on a procedural vote at our delegate assembly, so it was never put into place. But there are people thinking about it, certainly. And as Sarah said, mostly more rural, downstate Illinois.
Okay, good. Jamie, do you have some comments relative to this?
Well, I would find it very hard to imagine any of our heads of school or administrators having to bring into the interview process as they're looking for qualified teachers this notion of then and additionally having the option even of being able to protect their students. Our schools, again, by their very nature, are designed to be very open, welcoming, warm, safe communities. So I think that the notion of arming teachers or administrators would be very counter to the whole existence of our schools. Mm-hmm. And I can't imagine a scenario where any one of our schools would embrace that. Okay,
good. Melissa, do you have any thoughts?
Just a real quick follow-up. I think as Paul articulated, this isn't something we necessarily encourage at all, but we do believe that it is a community decision because we do have some unique circumstances. We also take into consideration that most of our perpetrators in our school shootings have been children. And, when you're talking about trying to, detain or eliminate that situation, that's a challenge for any of us, but particularly for educators who don't have the kind of training and don't have the kind of ongoing training to be put in that position. And so, that's part of our discussions that we have with our schools who are debating this issue. It's very, very complicated. It is not as easy as it sounds with some of the sound bites we hear in some of the political discussions around this. So, and you can see the passion that we're all exhibiting. It's something that needs to be taking a considerable amount of time. If you are thinking about that as an option, as Paul articulated, it needs to have considerable amount of discussion, arm in arm with your law enforcement community, to determine if this is the right one.
Okay, great, thank you.